For almost every team and every fan base across the NFL, this time of year is supposed to be painfully boring. Unfortunately, the Miami Dolphins exist. I have a hard time understanding the logic there, but it gets like the Ramsey thing is actually worse. The guy's an all-pro in 2023. The team paid him accordingly on an extension. Then he has a mediocre season. Why would you extend somebody whose attitude sucks? If you have a feeling that this guy might be a problem, Chris, in your locker room off the field, don't you think that's something you should do some due diligence on before you pay them? Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bill season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And I'm here sipping on a nice cold Montucky, flown all the way in from Nevada.
Is it Nevada or Nevada?
I don't know. I feel like Nevada's, I think if you call it Nevada, everyone in the room just assumes that you're a jerk off.
Tomato?
Yeah, but again, if someone came in and said, hey, Chris, can you cut up some tomato for a salad? Like, I never understood that. Tomato. No, it's not the same, because if you say the word tomato to me, I'm going to assume you're an idiot.
Or British. Think of how Gordon Ramsay says it. Tomato.
I was going to say, at the risk of offending our British listenership, is there a difference? Happy 4th of July, everybody. Don't tread on me, Terry White, all right, with your tomato nonsense. Guys, we're here with our AFC East Roundup pre-training camp preview series, and honestly, I didn't think I'd start it this soon, and yet here we are. Because, Chris, this time of year is supposed to be boring.
It is.
As a lover of the NFL football this time of year kind of stinks. Like being a hardcore fan of it. You get the CFL, but that doesn't really scratch the itch because it's not.
You have
really
Aaron
the same
Rodgers
sport.
on the cover of, I think, GQ. That might be a thing.
Think about all of the football adjacent things you might be able to watch. Like you could watch CFL, right? But that's not really football. It's got its moments. Don't get me wrong, but it's not really football. The headlines of any major publication about the NFL or about football, like Pro Football Talk, it's filled with much ado about nothing. I mean, today I went there just looking for something. I'm like, okay, give me something. You know, scrolling my phone while making my lunch, and I see an article at Pro Football Talk about how former Patriots quarterback Mac Jones is working really hard to be ready when they need him. I
don't even know who he plays for.
Exactly. They being the San Francisco 49ers. The fact that anybody with a platform has to go talk to Mac Jones, just talk to him at all, point blank or period, kind of underscores just how off the grid most NFL players are. Right?
Yes.
Rosters are supposed to be mostly settled, and barring run-ins with the law, you're not supposed to really hear most players' names being discussed in the mainstream media unless it's either through rose-colored optimistic puff pieces, unless it's things being written about charity programs like, Harrison Phillips was back in Buffalo like a week or so ago with his Playmakers Foundation, and they did a big thing over at Woodlawn Beach, or fantasy football projections. Those are supposed to be the only places you're still hearing about big name players and core pieces of people's franchises. For almost every team and every fan base across the NFL, this time of year is supposed to be painfully boring. Unfortunately, the Miami Dolphins exist. And that is the thing that we all get to take in together. What was your reaction when you first saw the two? Like, how did you find out about the trade?
I don't remember how I found out about the trade, but I do remember where I was sitting right where you were doing work when Nate and Alf started going back and forth on Twitter. And then I
you
inserted a Drew Gear GIF.
Of course you did. Guys, I make the best GIFs. Just stick around. Adam Schefter breaks it on Monday that there's or Tuesday was it Monday major headlines: the return of Minkah Fitzpatrick to Miami and the departure of recently extended Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith. And it's jarring, right? Because Jonnu Smith led the team in receptions in 2024, was second on the team in yardage behind Tyreek Hill, only by 70 yards behind him, which shows you that he was clearly a reliable target for a quarterback who's usually scrambling, looking for a safety valve when things break down. I have a hard time understanding the logic there, but it gets like the Ramsey thing is actually worse, right? Because the guy's an all-pro in 2023. The team paid him accordingly on an extension. Then he has a mediocre season, as did the entire Dolphins defense. And as soon as 2024 ended, all this talk about a departure starts and then lands this week in hilarious fashion. Because it's not like they got better, Chris. They got like a late round draft pick in Minkah Fitzpatrick. And what's hard is that the Dolphins GM Chris Greer. Now I sat there Monday. I went into some Miami Dolphins like spaces on Twitter, and the as the kids call it, a crash out was epic, right? Like just fan on fan crime, everyone upset, yelling at each other. Some people think Greer's doing a great thing of getting rid of all the terrible attitudes. Other people are pissed off because why would you extend somebody whose attitude sucks? If you have a feeling that this guy might be a problem, Chris, in your locker room off the field, don't you think that's something you should do some due diligence on before you pay them?
Yeah, you should trade them to Utah so they can find 4 a.m. German bars out there. I'm sure there's plenty of them.
It took a Dolphins fan pointing out that Chris Greer back in April went out of his way during a press conference after, around the draft to say that at the end of the day, Jalen didn't ask for a trade. We just felt that after numerous conversations, it was best for all parties to move forward separately. It took an angry Dolphins fan screaming at his, fellow fans in a Twitter space for me to go find that nugget. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why did you pay him then? Like what? Chris, it just dawned on you that his attitude sucks. Like one day you just woke up and went, hey, you know what? That Jalen Ramsey guy's kind of a jerk. I don't know why we gave him $25 million.
Yeah.
Or like you only realized it when you didn't make the playoffs. And I'll say this, Minkah Fitzpatrick, former All-Pro, not a terrible player, former Alabama guy. He's had a great NFL career. He has been one of the better, like, Swiss Army knife safeties of the last decade and change. But it clearly didn't move the needle much for an already hyperbolic Dolphins fan base. And then after that same fan base, right, like they get teased because for the 24 hours immediately following that trade announcement, I saw all these pieces being written by beat reporters, guys like Omar Kelly and Joe Shad, talking about, okay, well, now I'm hearing rumblings that the Dolphins are, investigating moves for a tight end. Who might they be targeting? Look at Michael Mayer, who's now tight end 2 by default out in Oakland because Brock Bowers was such a preeminent receiving talent last year. Look at Kyle Pitts, who's just had an up and down career, but athletically looks to be like a very special type of talent that you could use in the right type of offense. All of these options and fans trying to find silver linings. Those guys woke up like reverse Christmas. Like usually on Christmas, you wake up, there's something nice tucked under the tree from you. Here, the Dolphins fans woke up and found out someone upper decked their toilets because Chris Greer traded a throwaway conditional late round pick for the corpse of Darren Waller, a guy who retired from the NFL last year and just
he went on to become a rapper.
He was rapping, guys. He was in the studio when they called. I'd love to have the video of that. You know how they always do like behind the music?
Yes.
I would love to see the behind the music video of him being in the studio when he gets that phone call from his agent. And he has to be like, all right, guys, we're going to shut this down. Why? Because Miami's going to give me maybe $5 million to do God knows what. I'm going to come off. Chris, imagine no NFL conditioning and then you're going to come off the couch.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This seems like a bad idea, doesn't it? So with that in mind, this would all rub most fan bases the wrong way. And in a lot of ways makes them almost kindred spirits to Sabres fans right now who are watching their franchise just divest themselves of talent with seemingly no real plan to replace it. Palm Beach Post reporter Joe Shad ran a poll about the 2025 Dolphins season would end up according to his readership, and 51% of the respondees pegged the Dolphins to once again miss the playoffs. Chris, what's your take on that? Like,
I don't think Miami's making the playoffs this year. Like, they haven't done anything. Like, I think New England has a better shot at challenging for the second spot in the East than
and that's not a
Miami.
novel concept. We've talked about that. But someone I'd like to talk to about it even more so, just than, because Chris and I can sit here and pontificate about all the things we think are wrong with the Dolphins. I'd rather turn to an expert on the matter. And with that, we welcome to the show Mr. Alf Arteaga from 3 Yards Per Carry. So, Alf, I'm glad to see you survived. You survived what was the aftermath of another, and it sickens me to say that out loud, another Stanley Cup title.
And I'm happy to report that my bank account is kind of surviving too. After this incessant, what seems to be a yearly event, money grab by the Florida Panthers and NHL shop.
I see you wearing your new NHL championship hat for the Florida Panthers. Guys, it was hilarious getting the text messages and just the updates from Elf as he hit the parade route. He's just like, I'm at the elbow room. Bills, everybody who travels for Bills games down to Miami knows the elbow room, right?
Yes.
So it was awesome. Just tell me what that experience is like.
I think Alf, I think you have stock in elbow room the same way that Aziz Ansari has stock in the Snake Hole Lounge in Parks and Rec. I think you gave them $10,000 to have stock.
Well, I walk into the elbow room. Well, first of all, I had to stay in Fort Lauderdale Beach because my wife gets the bright idea. Look, last year when we went to the parade, it was a mess. We had to walk like 10 miles to get to anywhere where we could see the parade or even hang out and have drinks at Bo's Beach or anything. So she gets the bright idea. You know what? Why don't we just get a hotel room? So naturally, I'm paying like $400 a night for a hotel room because every single hotel room is like sold out. I somehow get a hotel room right on the parade route, like right outside of the parade route, but you're walking a block.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you've ever been to Fort Lauderdale Beach, everything's like close together. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like the elbow room is right next to Bo's Beach. Bo's Beach is right next to 411. 411 is right next to Senor Frogs. So you're basically walking like 5 blocks back and forth to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really have to go too far. You don't even have to take your car. You just leave your hotel room and just walk to places. You can walk to breakfast. You can walk to drinks. You can walk to lunch. So we decided to do that. So I'm already much, much, much lighter, right? And then my wife tells me Sam Bennett is going to be at the mall in Wellington. If you've ever been to Wellington, Wellington is like some outpost out west. God knows why he has to go to Wellington to do this autograph signing. And he's going to bring the Conn Smythe trophy. I think I sent you a picture of the Conn Smythe.
Yep.
And so sure enough, I buy a puck, a game used puck from game 3, because if you remember, that was when we beat the crap out of them.
Mm-hmm.
They had game used pucks from game.
I was going to say, you had enough of them from that third game. It was like what? It was great. What was Chris? I think the final on that one was 6-1.
Oh, I shut it off in the second period.
Yeah, 6-1. So I buy a game used puck from game 3 because they had no game used pucks from game 6, right? They had game used pucks from game 4, but I don't want to relive that mess. So I buy a game used puck from game 3. So now I'm ready to go. So I'm driving almost 2 hours to Wellington. I get Sam Bennett's autograph. I'm good to go. Picture of the Conn Smythe trophy. Now I'm headed to Fort Lauderdale. I get to Fort Lauderdale. I check in. And my wife says, let's go to the elbow room. Now, I go to the elbow room with the foreknowledge that it's cash only, right? So I got about $100 in $20 bills. That should be enough, right? Well, 5 trips to the ATM later, about three times later. And, the way I do it is like, I do it scientifically. You know what I mean? Like,
sounds like it. Yeah, this sounds real scientific.
Like I know a round, meaning my beer, my wife's beer, and my daughter's High Noon is going to run me about $25.
Mm-hmm.
So I figure if I go 50 at a time, it's 2 rounds,
Mm-hmm.
and I still have enough pocket change to tip.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm fine, right? The problem is you end up doing like about 4 or 5 trips to the ATM for $50 a pop, and they charge you like $4 each time you take out $50. So I should have just taken out like $300.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a good time. A lot of Dolphin signage for a Buffalo Bills bar, but oddly enough, there's a lot of pictures of Buffalo Bills players on the wall.
Yes, that's the only thing we have down there right now this time of year. Although the NFL,
so I'm sitting. I sent you a picture of where I was sitting at the bar. That's the second floor, right next to the balcony.
Yep.
To the left of me, I don't think you see it in the picture, but there's a picture of Deion Dawkins like this.
That's awesome.
At the elbow room, and he's like right over my shoulder.
That's awesome.
So,
unfortunately, we can't just sit here and gloat about the Miami or Florida team that's doing well. We have to talk about the Miami Dolphins. And I think you hit the nail on the head because as we were kind of introing in the conversation here, Joe Shad recently posted a poll that showed that 51% of those who responded don't think the Dolphins will even make the playoffs. And that makes me laugh on 2 fronts. First of all, whenever you and Nate Geary get together on Twitter, it just makes magic. You guys make me laugh to a degree that, you guys are a comedy troupe. I love it. You need to do a show together. It would be better than anything ESPN's put out on Debate TV for years. But then you had this tweet that made me belly laugh, where it's Miami Dolphins. We found the Ark of the Covenant. Some Dolphins fans, it's a shitty box and the gold is probably fake.
Yeah, it's the truth. It's the truth. We go through it for everything down here, just the Minka Fitzpatrick, Jalen Ramsey trade, right? So they make the trade for weeks on end. And trust me, I do a Dolphins podcast, so I know what these people are thinking, right? Because I get these questions in my DMs, and and I do a Q&A show for OnlyFans for our Discord, discord.gg/OnlyFans, $4.99 a month if you wish to subscribe and troll Dolphin fans. But I get these questions all the time. We're going to get nothing, aren't we? We're going to get a 6th round pick and like it. And we're going to have to eat $26 million of Jalen Ramsey's contract. And I'm like, look, if we know something about Chris Greer, we have our issues with Chris Greer, but he tends to not lose trades. Like, he tends to hold out. Chris Greer is that annoying guy in your fantasy league that you can never make a trade with because he just won't budge.
Well, it's me. If I don't think I'm getting the better end of a trade, I just won't give it to you.
Sounds like Kevin Adams.
So it turns out that no, they're not going to get boned for $26 million. They got boned for $7 million. They picked up $3 million. They had already paid him $4 million bonus, and they had to because they had to cut him on January 1st if they didn't pay him the $4 million. February 1st, I'm sorry. If they didn't cut him. So they paid him the $4 million to have him on the roster on February 1st. So that's gone, right? So now they're on the hook for another $21 million, right? Well, the Steelers are picking up $18 million of it. Dolphins pick up $3 million, and you get Minka Fitzpatrick, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, and he's 3 years younger than Jalen Ramsey.
Well, that's the fascinating part about this trade. For as much as I make fun about the players involved, I feel like, and maybe it's just because of how, and like both players are very highly visible at their positions, right? You have a very visible safety who's he started his career with the Dolphins, came out of college as like a powerhouse type player where you're like, that's a name that we're going to remember for a very long time. Jalen Ramsey, preeminent talent at what he does in the NFL. Again, a name that will be talked about during his time in the NFL. When you talk about who are the top cornerbacks in the NFL, he's always going to be in that conversation. I think that people forget that just because Fitzpatrick has gotten so much press, it makes him feel like Methuselah, but he's not really that old.
He's 28.
This is what I love about Dolphins fans. You're talking about a fan base like Chris, my single. You're talking about a fan base that had Jordan Poyer. Jordan Poyer was playing like a significant number of snaps for you, and you talked yourselves into thinking that was going to be okay. But you're going to spit on the idea of Minkah Fitzpatrick? The hell's wrong with you? That's Elf.
No, and my other favorite from this whole episode, the last couple of days, is how Jonnu Smith has now turned into a cross between Christy McCaffrey, George Kittle, and Calvin Johnson. You know,
you said this on your podcast immediately following the trade. You made the comment. You were like, and I think you might have even tweeted it out. You were like, watch the way the media starts talking about both of these players now that they're part of different franchises. The way that the media starts talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to change, and the way they start talking about Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey is going to change just because of the logo on the side of the helmet. Nothing's different other than the colors of the uniform, but everyone's going to somehow act like it's something different than what it was going to be without it.
And what people don't understand about what happened with the Dolphins last year is, look, Jonnu Smith is a good player, but the Dolphins paid him as the 31st highest paid tight end in football. Meaning there was 30 other starting tight ends that got paid more than Jonnu Smith last year. Yeah. $4 million. So he was due to make $4 million again this year. It was a 2-year, I think it was a 2-year, $10 million deal with incentives, but he had a $4 million base for this year. He says, no, I'm not playing on that. I need a new contract. Turns out what he wanted was $12 million a year. He wanted to be the 7th highest paid tight end in football. And the Dolphins said, we can't do that.
We're not doing that. No,
we're not doing that. And we're not doing it for a 31-year-old tight end either.
Yeah, okay? We're paying you what we think you're worth. And that's why, like, when you see people, again, it all comes down to preconceived notions. If you're an angry Dolphins fan who doesn't like anything the franchise does, it's very easy to look at this and throw rocks. If you're someone like me who's a Bills fan who loves to just talk shit, it's very easy to find ways to poke holes in this and throw stones and have snark. At the same time, you look at that trade in a vacuum and you go, I don't know. I don't think the Dolphins got notably worse in this, other than it creates a whole lot of position. Like, now there's questions and the team's going to have to find an answer for them. With that said, I also find it hilarious that the Steelers, what's his face? The offensive coordinator over there. This is now like the 3rd time he'll have Jonnu Smith on his team. Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator for the Steelers, will now have his 3rd different team that features Jonnu Smith on it. And it's like at a certain point, how much was it just about his crush on that player who you watched him defer to Jonnu Smith over Kyle Pitts? Like, do you remember that guy's in your roster? Nah, we've got Jonnu Smith. It's fine.
And people have to understand he was highly productive last year. But what happened last year? You had Tyreek Hill. Evidently, the team was hiding a wrist injury that he had surgery for at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
So he was injured all year. Waddle was injured all year. They had injuries at the running back position. Tua missed 6 games. The reason he was so productive, and not to shit on Jonnu Smith, because I think he's a really good player. In fact, I think all the players involved in this trade are good players. But Jonnu Smith was highly productive because the offense was essentially broken.
Yeah. No, it's like, look at the Raiders. When people say Brock Bowers, like, I kind of opened the show talking about how fans might also be hurt because of all the options that got floated and they got teased with things like, well, you could have this the Dolphins are working the phones. And then they woke up to the opposite of Christmas and there was just Darren Waller. They're like, wait, what? Darren Waller, the guy who was just rapping? Oh, shit. This is terrible. What I think is funny about that dynamic is that, like, Brock Bowers on a lot of other teams with other talented wide receivers and pass catchers probably doesn't lead the team in targets and receiving because he's a tight end. Functionally, that's not a sound way to build an offense unless you have the next Travis Kelce, and even then that's a stretch. It's hard. They shoehorned him into the offense because he was the only thing that worked. And that's fine if you're a bad football team. If you're a team that's trying to be good and you think that you've got other skill players like Waddle and Hill who you're paying and you're going to incorporate, I don't know, how many targets? It's the Kincaid argument. Like, how big is Dalton Kincaid going to be? His opportunities are going to be better here in Buffalo than they would be on teams. Like, if you moved Kincaid to the Bengals, no one's even talking about Dalton Kincaid because they still have two much bigger mouths to feed.
Yeah.
And so,
and the other component to this is all the Dolphin fans freaking out by, oh my God, they got Darren Waller. They're expecting Darren Waller to get 88 catches, 900 yards, and 8 touchdowns. No. They expect Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill to do that.
They expect the running backs. They expect people to step up, guys they drafted, guys that they've invested in. It's just very funny.
They've also and they've also changed the offense. They're going to be more of an 11 personnel team this year. If you notice, all the tight ends are giant on this team.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Darren Waller is the only pass catching tight end. They got a guy that they got from as a UDFA, Jalen Connors, who's also giant, and he's a pass catching specialist. But the rest of the tight ends are big blocking slugs, essentially.
So when we get here to this point in the preseason process and we talk about pre-camp and just thoughts, feelings, like obviously we had to start with the Dolphins after the way this week started and just the way your fan base, like I went into some Twitter spaces because I'm petty and just listened to your fan base, hundreds of people just screaming at each other, just absolutely melting down. I was like, this seems about right for the Dolphins fan base. So let's talk about, because it's like, guys, if you just take a step back from the immediacy of this trade and take a look at the roster as a whole as you're getting ready to head into camp, I don't know. I mean, there's things to like, but also I understand some of it because they're in something of a precarious situation. Now, obviously, some of the more hyperbolic parts of your fan base are the ones who voted overwhelmingly that the Dolphins were going to miss the playoffs this year. And some of that is the fallout of this trade that we're talking about. Also, though, I said it on a podcast earlier this season, and Chris and I were talking about it off air earlier. Like, if there was a team in the AFC East that I think could underachieve its Vegas win total, I would say it's probably Miami. And that just comes down to the idea that when you're healthy, you're a really good team. Really good team when everybody's healthy and everything's working. Even the Bills fans out there that won't admit it. Guys, it's a really good football team. But they don't really ever stay healthy. The depth generally skews in a direction that doesn't do you any favors when those injuries start to happen. The slotting in Liam Eichenberg, the second one of your offensive linemen goes down. That's not great. And then you look at, okay, who are my tackles? And then Teron Armstead misses a game. And all of a sudden you're going, oh no, our tackle depth is bad. And you watch this almost annual collapse, but it's all across those lines. It typically becomes your undoing. He put out another thing about, now after this trade and the way that they built the room, they can maybe go win a wild card game. What are your thoughts personally on just the upshot of this team with this recently reshaped roster that they're taking into training camp?
Well, you got to understand that part of the things that they've done in this offseason, first of all, they're leaning into this 11 personnel thing. They have bigger tight ends. Mm-hmm. They have 2 new guards, big ones. Mm-hmm. James Daniels is 330 pounds and 7A is 335 pounds. So they have 2 big guards. They're kind of telling you they're going to run the football. Jalen Wright's going to get the football this year. They drafted Ollie Gordon.
The draft pick of Ollie. Well, that's what I was going to say. When you look at the depth chart, not to cut you off, but I'm excited about this because I forgot you guys drafted Ollie Gordon. I paid that little attention to the later rounds of the draft. When you look at this running back room that the Dolphins have, Achane, we know he's an all-purpose threat running back. He can catch. He can go out play the slot if you need him to. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He can run well off tackle. You drafted Jalen Wright to kind of be a combination threat with Achane in that regard to keep them both fresh throughout games. You bring in Alexander Madison, who's had some success in his NFL career. And then the draft pick of Ollie Gordon, who was this guy who was just a hammer. He reminded me of the guy that the Jets drafted last year, like the 5th round. Big kid out of Wisconsin, Braylon Allen, where here's a guy who probably should have gotten more press during the draft run. His stock fell. So you're buying low on an asset that could provide you with a lot of value if you're going to be a power running football team. Now that typically would skew more towards the Jets, but when I see the Dolphins make that decision, I go, there's something happening there. That doesn't happen by accident, right?
Yeah, no, and the offensive line, they're getting Austin Jackson back. Remember, he missed half the season last year.
Mm-hmm.
His last play was the last play of the Bills game.
Yep.
In week 9. And Patrick Paul, their second round pick from last year, is now the left tackle. He's 6'8", 345 pounds. So they have a pretty big offensive line. The head coach has said they got to have more success running inside zone if they're going to be better this year. They got to be better on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. It seems like they've geared themselves toward doing that. And on defense, they're adding 2 edge rushers. They didn't have Bradley Chubb or Jalen Phillips played 3 games last year.
Sure. Now,
Okay.
I want to have a big conversation about the defense, but before we leave the offense, I want to bring this up because Tyler Dunn over at golongtd.com wrote an article on Monday, kind of after the trades and kind of their new look identity. In fact, no, it was yesterday, the 2nd. And he made some really great points that this is an offense that it's brimming with potential, which is always the thing that the Dolphins are putting out there. They're just doing it differently. There are a lot of Tua Tagovailoa haters out there, sometimes myself included, who don't want to respect him as a good quarterback. And you, for some reason, see fit to do battle with these people on social media all day long. Most of them are within your own fan base, which is crazy. Comes back from injury in 2024, and he highlights the fact that after he came back, there was a stretch where he was one of the hottest quarterbacks in the entire NFL. He threw for 2,384 yards, had a 74% completion percentage, 17 touchdowns against 4 picks. He was absolutely lights out as a quarterback in this offense. And the team started winning games. Like if it wasn't for that lull without a quarterback, they're probably a playoff team. The run game is what's most notably failed you guys. And you yourself put out a series of tweets this week underscoring that. It was almost geared towards Bills fans, and it got the engagement I think you were looking for. In fact, if you guys want to see it, at Rockpile Report, I'll retweet it right now as we're recording the show just to put it out there on your feeds. You kind of underscored the fact that they've had some really dominant rushing performances against the Buffalo Bills, and that it really is just it's late defense. It's just like late defense and play calling that moved away from the run that cost them those games.
The game in Buffalo this past year, week 9, was maddening. You have the quarterback playing perfect. He had 3 incompletions. One of them was a throwaway. The other one was a drop. And one was a spike right before halftime. So he damn near played perfect. What was it, 25 of 28 or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
They run the ball effectively. The Raheem Mostert fumble in that game was death.
Well, when neither team is playing defense, it just comes up to who makes the first mistake. And that was it. It was you guys.
Yeah, the score is 10-6. The score is 10-6. And you can't give the ball back to Josh Allen. You got the ball and the lead. So you already have it dancing in your heads. Look, if we take a 2-score lead, Josh Allen now has to score twice against you. Okay? So you're essentially just trying to put up as many points to just keep the Bills at bay.
That's it.
And what do? They're driving right down the field. They hit a pass. They get a run. Mostert breaks a run, and he fumbles. What does Josh Allen do? 3 plays later, they're in the end zone. And now they got the lead. And what do they do for the rest of the game? They trade touchdowns.
Yep.
Until Tyler Bass hits a 61-yard field goal to win the game.
And that's it. Like, you should feel good as a Dolphins fan walking away from that going, fuck. We were one fumble from and then hilariously, he's one of the players who trashed the Dolphins after the trade. Yeah. It's like, dude, you're not here because you're old and you fumbled. You're not here because you were old and then you screwed us when we trusted.
He also fumbled at his own 12-yard line against the Colts. And the Dolphins lose that game 16-10. And of course, when he fumbled at his own 12-yard line against the Colts scored a touchdown on that drive.
Yep.
So you could almost lay the blame at 2 games at his feet.
So it is comical to see that he's come out of the woodwork to chirp the Dolphins. But so with that said, before we get out of here, I look at this from an offensive perspective heading into the preseason. There's still a lot to like about the Miami Dolphins. But when I'm looking at your depth chart, there's a couple things that concern me as somebody who, if I take my Bills fandom out of this and I just try to look at this as an objective observer, I look at what's behind all of your wide receivers in the fact that you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I think Westbrook-Ikhine, great. I think that's it's an underrated signing, we'll call it.
Yeah, it's the first time. Last year they kind of tried it with Odell Beckham.
Yeah.
But this is the first time that they actually signed a proven wide receiver 3.
Yeah, it's like, look, you would never on a team like for the Titans last year, he was one of their best receivers, which tells you how that went. But as a wide receiver 3 with his skill set, he can be really useful for the offense. Now, the problem is if anybody gets hurt, what does this depth look like? And are you concerned at all about that depth chart? And then I just want to pick your brain about where you think, like, in terms of Zach Wilson. Like, those are the two things I'm most fascinated. Your eyes, the way your eyes lit up when I said the word Zach Wilson. So first of all, wide receiver 4 and beyond. And then also the Zach Wilson thing for a team that knows their quarterback has issues staying healthy. Talk to me a little bit about both those decisions.
Well, wide receiver 4, I think Dolphin fans feel pretty good about wide receiver 4 because it's Malik Washington, and he came on last year. Okay. He's tough as nails, and he's not tall. He's diminutive in height. I believe he's 5'9", but he's 195 pounds. Okay. So he's a pretty physical guy, and
for a
kind of a fan favorite. He's a guy who's going to fight you. He's going to scrap. So he's a fan favorite. So you're kind of happy about that. They're getting Taj Washington, a draft pick from last year. He got hurt in the offseason program last year. Mm-hmm. We don't know what he is. We do know he has speed. So we'll see what he is. But pretty much they got a solid 1 through 4, and they're trying to sort out 5 and 6.
And that's the thing. When you have a guy like Malik Washington, where it's like, look, in a timing-based offense, I just need you to be quick. And if you can build a rapport, it's a whole different ball game compared to offenses that force the wide receiver to do more of the heavy lifting. Like, hey, I need you to go get natural separation. Mike McDaniel's offense is more of, hey, I know where I want you to be. As long as you get to the spot, you have one of the more accurate quarterbacks in football who's going to get the ball there. As long as he's not on the ground. As long as he's not already on the ground or running for his life, he can deliver some really accurate throws. Now, this might be one of the biggest things for me. A team that knows that their quarterback has failed to finish most seasons from wire to wire. You would want to see them pressing. You know, they might be, in my mind, you're a team that should be on the phone with a Kirk Cousins. That should be like, hey, look, man, your situation sucks. We're going to free up some money somehow, some way, and get you in here as QB2. If we really like Zach Wilson, we could make him QB3. We don't shit. You can sit here on the practice squad and hold a clipboard for all we care. We want to win football games if and when Tua Tagovailoa goes down, which history has shown us happens. How comfortable are you with this Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers idea?
Well, you know how I feel about Quinn Ewers. I didn't have a very good evaluation of him coming out of Texas. I think he had all the talent in the world and didn't do much with it at Texas. Okay, Zach Wilson, it's a weird thing. Like, you can watch some of his tape in Denver in the preseason, and he's going to look great.
Oh, you're talking about football. I thought you were talking about the way moms gravitate towards him.
I don't know. Have you seen his mom? Like, his mom. Yeah, you know you're old when you look at your QB2's mother and you're like,
she's my age. Do that?
Yeah. Actually, she's younger than me. So that tells you. Like, what is she? What is Zach Wilson's mother? I think she is.
Chris, 45? Give that a goog. Give that a goog for me.
Google it. You got to Google Zach Wilson's mother. But yeah, I don't know what that's going to be. But that's one of those things. That's a McDaniel special. McDaniel just went out there and said, I can fix it. I like what I see. I like the arm talent. All right, we'll see, what's up, But
does it frustrate
you? Hopefully it's one of those things where we're worrying about it
48
now.
or 49.
Okay. It looks pretty good for 48 or 49.
Does it frustrate you that there wasn't a more concerted effort to bring in a more experienced QB2?
Yeah, I thought that they should have done the most obvious thing. Just bring in an old head, bring in Joe Flacco, bring in, I kind of like it. Or you could have gone completely off the reservation and although Justin Fields did get offered a starting gig, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So you probably weren't going to get him.
Yeah.
So I was thinking more like do something completely off the wall, like a Justin Fields, or just get an old head like Joe Flacco.
Yep.
Yeah, I like your Kirk Cousins idea, but he also makes a ton of money. I don't know how they were going to make that work.
Yeah. That's true. So offensively, there's some things that are going to have to be watched when training camp comes around that you're going to have to sort out. But on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, the front seven is going to have to be the straw that stirs the drink here, right? Because you now have a massive hole at cornerback. And I guess the way I would start that cornerback conversation is the teams don't typically divest themselves of their most established veteran boundary presence. I mean, in AFC East play, that might be okay. You might be fine because you look at the conference or the division and there might not actually be a threat, quote unquote, on the outside that really scares the Miami Dolphins within their own division. But when you go around the AFC as a whole, they're going to have games this year against teams who can absolutely kill teams with weak boundary corner play, outside corner play, not the teams that don't have good safety play. And so with that in mind, it puts the Dolphins in something of a distinct disadvantage as you go on down the depth chart, and God forbid there's injuries. I guess in your mind, how do they this is something play calling is going to have to square up because I don't see them finding true reinforcements anywhere.
Well, they have an offer out for Rasul Douglas right now. So
bastards.
That's a guy that they made him an offer. Like they made Rasul Douglas an offer and they've been playing footsies with Asante Samuel Jr.
Okay.
But Asante Samuel Jr. has just been cleared for contact. I expect them to revisit the Rasul Douglas thing, and maybe they juice up the offer because they made Rasul Douglas an offer about a month ago that was, I guess, on the low side. And Rasul Douglas, I guess, came back to them and told them sort out the Jalen Ramsey thing and see how that works out because that was going to free up some money.
Yep.
To be able to, do some things. But now, if you look at it, they ended up saving $9 million because remember they're taking on 15 from Minkah Fitzpatrick. So they saved $9 million in the trade. So they have a little bit of money, but they still have to sign. Because if you've noticed, the entire league has not signed their second round picks yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So they got to sign. Jonas Avanea. That's their second, and he's going to be important. He's going to be starting at guard for them. So they got to sign him. They got to leave some money aside for the regular season. And then they got to make a competitive offer for Rasul Douglas. So they're probably going to have to make another move somewhere down the line on the roster. Probably a restructure somewhere or two, or an extension for like a Jordan Brooks or an Aaron Brewer to free up a little bit of cash so they could be competitive for probably both cornerbacks. They like the young guys. They've liked Kader Kohu forever, and he's a guy who's had some really good moments on this team. So a lot of it's going to be play calling. They're going to play a lot of three safety stuff.
Yep. I was just say,
if you look at the way that the team is now constructed, they got a lot of money now at safety.
I was going to say, I'm thinking like cover 3 coverage. You're going to see, that in quarters. I think that with play calling, even though Tyreek Hill thinks that's for bitches, I think that quarters coverage might be the smartest thing for the 2025 Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
And you throw in a little cover 3. I think you can at least get away with what you guys have to work with.
It's odd because Tyreek Hill used to wear a T-shirt in training camp that said "Zone is for cowards," and
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie to you. I like that.
Yeah, his team might be one that might play more zone than anybody else anywhere.
Yeah, And then, so obviously that's something that people are going to have to watch, and Dolphins fans everywhere should be paying very close attention to. And obviously there's going to be churn. 7A is going to see, can he, it's a very low bar to clear, but can he beat out Eichenberg for that guard job? I assume he can.
Well, he's being handed the job.
It's being given to him. It's
yeah,
like,
Mike McDaniel was asked, is he going to be competition? And Mike McDaniel goes, we drafted him with the intention that he's going to start.
It's like when the Bills drafted Osiris Torrance.
Yeah.
And it was him and Ryan Bates for the guard job. And it took like the first week of camp. They just gave it to Torrance. They're like, no, this guy.
Yeah, the only thing they got to sort out is that James Daniels played the first half of his career at left guard and then has played the second half of his career at right guard.
Okay.
And Savanea has done the same thing at Arizona.
So it's who plays where.
Yeah, they got to figure out who's going where of those two guys, because both guys essentially have mirror careers. Like both of them have played both guard spots for half of their career.
So you've got some churn going on in the offensive line that's going to have to gel before week one. You've got questions in the secondary as to how are we going to answer this divestment of talent? And are we going to do it with scheme? Are we going to sign somebody who kind of raises the level of competition there in the room? There's a lot going on around the roster for the Dolphins in terms of position battles and things like that. Bullish and bearish. I want to know a position group that you're highest and lowest on ahead of camp, and then a player that fits each category for you.
Okay, on the front, I love the front seven. I love the front seven, the way it's constructed. They redid the entire linebacking room. They essentially got rid of everybody, brought back Tyrell Dodson. They made it a competitive offer for Dre Greenlaw, and they dodged the bullet because now Dre Greenlaw is going to essentially miss maybe all of camp.
You do know that if you guys sign Rasul Douglas and you've got Tyrell Dodson, people are going to start talking. They're going to be like, oh, the same way we talk about the Carolina Panthers pipeline. They're going to be like, oh, there's a Bills to Miami pipeline.
Yeah, I do expect that Rasul Douglas thing to get done.
Which makes me sad because he was my insurance policy.
That's the guy that they've been hot on for an entire month. I expect them to bend. I think Rasul Douglas is looking around and saying, is this all there is? Can I get a little bit more money? You know what I mean?
I makes me mad because he was hopefully like in my fan heart of hearts, I was hoping that Rasul Douglas was the thing that they would just like hurry up and do when they realized Dane Jackson probably shouldn't still be on your roster competing for a spot.
Yeah. But I really like the front seven. I like Jordan Brooks, Tyrell Dodson, Willie Gay, KJ Britt. That's a pretty solid linebacking core. I like all four players. All four players have a role to play on the defense. Front seven should be pretty juicy. If any of these, look, I was a big proponent of Kenneth Grant. I loved Kenneth Grant coming out. That's who I wanted in the first round and said so before the draft, which is important, especially when you go on Twitter, because I found out a couple of days ago that essentially everybody on Twitter knew that Jonnu Smith was going to set franchise records for And that's why the Dolphins were able to pay him only $4 million a year when backup tight ends are getting $7 million a year. Okay,
I love that you're petty.
That's why
like
you had
we
the
are.
great bidding war of 2024 to sign Jonnu Smith, right? So everybody knew he was going to be a megastar, right? So just like everybody knew he was going to be a megastar.
You called
I was
Kenneth
all
Grant
in on Kenneth Grant. I love the draft pick. Zach Sealer is solid. They're getting back their two edge rushers, and I really like what they did as far as drafting. They drafted Jordan Phillips and Zeke Biggers, two giant defensive tackles, especially Jordan Phillips. I don't know if you've seen what that guy looks like, but he could be a competitive weight lifter.
Jordan Phillips and Biggers. Those were two guys who got talked about a lot by Bills fans because, well, first of all, a defensive lineman of that size whose name is Biggers is just, it's objectively funny. And also just like when Jordan Phillips and we were like, oh, we had a Jordan Phillips. Could we replace him with another Jordan Phillips who might have more upside? Like, I'm very familiar with both players. I really like for what your defense is, how that front seven might work.
Yeah.
Now tell me it's everything around it.
You have Phillips and Chubb outside, and the guy that I'm looking at, and I'm expecting him to take a pretty big jump, is Chop Robinson.
Yeah, Chop had a good season.
He had a good season, and now he has. Because last year he was just thrust into, here you're in the starting lineup, go play 60 snaps a game. Yeah. And I don't think that's his game.
Well, and you watched him hit the rookie wall. where he had a really great start to the season, and then down the stretch, you just see it. And it's called that for a reason. People go, oh, no, he's not that good. Every rookie will tell you if you ask them. Yeah, I'm used to playing 12 games, maybe 13. You're talking about week 15 against much more grueling competition. I'm cooked out here physically. Also, I spent the whole offseason politicking and grandstanding instead of training. So that's where that second year, that sophomore kind of expansion of like understanding of the game and how to get your body ready for football is really supposed to make a difference. And so it'll be interesting to see what that does for Chop Robinson, because his pressure numbers, the sack numbers might not have been there, but the pressure numbers were great. And he did a lot for that defense in the absence of some of the star players who were supposed to be around him.
Yeah. So now you got Chubb and Phillips, and then Chop Robinson should divvy up those snaps on the outside. And they have a few young guys, they still have a few young guys that they're returning from last year. A guy that's returning from injury that really impressed in training camp is Grayson Murphy from UCLA. He's a guy who a lot like Mo Kamara doesn't have the measurables, but he has like gaudy sack numbers at UCLA.
Son of a bitch. He was a pick that I loved. Ever since I watched them play Colorado, I was like, God, I would give me some Mo Kamara. Of course, he goes to the Dolphins.
Yeah, so they got those guys coming back. So they're pretty loaded in that front seven,
Yeah.
They need help at cornerback. They're going to try to get it with Rasul Douglas. The rest is really an unknown. And then kind of a guy that you can trust in Kader Kauhu. So they are thin out there. You kind of like their safety room. If I had to put my finger on their Achilles heel, I think it's probably their depth on the offensive line.
Sure. Wait, hang on. Whoa. You know what? Chris, quote that. Alf Arteaga, 2025. I think the depth of this team, I think the Achilles heel of this team is the depth in the offensive line. And I bet you if you go back through the archives of all the times we've had this conversation, you can go right back to this exact same quote in some way, shape, or form for the last 3 or 4 years. I do question why your team hasn't just really made a concerted effort to build that up. I mean, you watched Buffalo do it, and it's why Buffalo is more successful than, you saw the Patriots. Just the Patriots had the worst offensive line in the entire NFL. And I don't think that's a bridge too far to say that last year.
Well, it's baby steps. They spent a second-round pick last year, a second-round pick this year, and big free agent dollars for James Daniels.
Sure, but but you're finally building assets into it. And I don't understand, like you saw in 2019 when they realized Josh was going to be the guy, they said, okay, screw it. Let's bring in 9 offensive linemen. Everyone's fired. Everyone fights for their jobs except for Deion Dawkins. You want to know why? Because he's the one thing we can trust on this line. You guys have a good center. So I don't know why. And you have Austin Jackson. So really you have less work to do. I don't understand what's up to saying, look, we're going to bring in 8 more bodies to camp who all have NFL experience and a starter's at least an outside shot at starting, and let them fight it out.
Yeah, I would say the Dolphins are short a swing tackle because they have young guys right now backing up Patrick Paul and Austin Jackson. And Austin Jackson had an injury last year, so that's a guy that you have to watch and be suspicious of if he can stay healthy. Remember he missed games too 2 years before in 2022. So he's had his own injury issues.
What player are you the most invested in terms of winning their individual camp battle, quote unquote?
That's a really, really good question. I want to see further development from Julian Hill.
Okay.
Because he's really, really physical. They got him like this is a siren that has to be going off in his head. Like, don't buy a house. As soon as they sign Farrell Brown, they're essentially signing your clone, but more reliable. That's been on more teams.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So they want you to be that big, strong brute of a tight end. You had some penalties last year. They bring in Farrell Brown. They're essentially telling you, we're trusting that guy before we trust you.
Yep. We paid that guy. You were already here. We gave you an opportunity, and you not taking advantage of it is why this guy's here. Yeah.
And if you look at their depth chart, they're essentially, it's kind of redundant, right?
Yeah.
Like their starting tight end is going to be Farrell Brown. He's a blocker.
Yep.
Julian Hill's right behind him. And then Darren Waller's their starting receiving tight end, and Jalen Connors and Tanner Connor are the guys behind him. And then they got Hayden Rucci just out there, who's a massive tight end. I think he's a 275-pound tight end. I loved him last year in training camp, but I guess they didn't like him with all the movement and
Sure.
and all the motions that we run.
Yep.
So I guess they didn't like him, but he's a guy that I would keep an eye on as well, especially if they're gonna evolve into having more an inline tight end and staying in 11 personnel.
It's funny you mentioned Julian Hill. And Chris, this is a shameless plug for Tyler Dunn. I'm not trying to do it. It's just he did like a 3-part series on Julian Hill and just his life. And because Tyler Dunn, I don't know if you know this, Alf, he wrote the book, The Blood and Guts, last year that was published. And it's just historical, like he's written pieces and it's interviews in the history of all of the great tight ends to ever play the game of football. And just talking about how it's really tight end play that makes football what it is. Because they're the only position that really blends the violence football needs with the skill that you need to see from it in order to keep it offensively forward. And it's like, that's a fascinating look at it. And so to know that he's out there talking to guys like Julian Hill, it tells you there's some momentum behind this guy and his story. And just, God, man, like this might be the last.
Well, he's a great kid.
Yeah.
I spoke to him last year at training camp. Great kid, loves the weight room. Like, he's built like an Adonis. I don't know if you've seen, seen him on the field, and
he's huge.
And he loves the violence of the game.
That's it. You have to.
Now,
you have to be that guy.
Don't throw him the football.
Well, that's the problem. It's like you can't just be out here. You can't be Lee Smith for the Buffalo Bills. Like
there were times, there was one play against the Jets last year. He caught a pass and he broke a tackle, and now he's running through the secondary, and I'm shitting my pants. I'm like, he's gonna get stripped. And he didn't. He didn't get stripped, But it was a pleasant surprise,
The Miami
ball
Dolphins
skills are not his forte.
The Miami Dolphins have a lot of questions heading into the offseason. There's not as many positions that are up for grabs as people might think. Before I get out of here, I just got to ask, Storm Duck. I look at this and I go, first of all, hilarious name. Like it's just a hilarious football. Like it's the type of football name I expect to see on Madden. When I've run so many seasons, it runs out of things to generate and it just starts picking random words.
Yeah, physical too. And Anthony Weaver absolutely loves him.
And this is what I was going to say is if he is out there, because you're talking, you look at the cornerback room, Artie Burns, the fact that Artie Burns is even around tells you that this situation is, you guys are scraping that bottom of the barrel there. And so you've got him, and then you're looking at Kader Kohu, and then a bunch of, a former second-round pick in Cam Smith that doesn't seem like he's really panned out. Or maybe he just really hasn't gotten the opportunity. Where do you think this goes, and where does Storm Duck fit into all of it compared to a guy like Cam Smith, who was a second-round pick?
Well, you got to don't forget Ethan Bonner, the track star. Mm-hmm. So he should be in the mix. Like he had a great training camp last year, and then all of a sudden, Anthony Weaver's benching him for Storm Duck. So Storm Duck, physical guy, kind of in the mold of a Kader Kohu. Cam Smith, it's about time. Cam Smith, most notable moment last year was just screaming at Jordan Poyer, "What are you doing?" When he got that it wasn't even pass interference. It was a helmet-to-helmet hit, wasn't it, on Keon Coleman?
Yep.
That lost us that fucking game.
He had 2 giant plays for you guys last year. The helmet to helmet on Keon Coleman, and then using his helmet to dislodge the kneecap of Jalen Phillips.
Oh, yeah, then make it 3 huge plays. He dropped the game-winning interception against the Cardinals.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, I wouldn't even call it dropped. It went right through his hand. And there was nobody in front of him, by the way. So, and the Dolphins were nursing like a 3-point lead at the time. So he would have scored with that thing. So yeah, Jordan Poyer was not good last year. No. It's bad. You know how big the egos are of these guys. These guys have huge egos. Like they all think that they're Hall of Famers, right? Jordan Poyer did a interview when the season ended when he famously said, "I don't think I played too good this year."
If you're saying that, it means in your head you kind of know. You already know.
You kind of know you weren't good. You know?
So when it comes to this cornerback room, you think Storm Duck really has a shot?
Yeah, he's a shot. He's in the mix. He's in the mix with like
All
4 or 5 guys for one spot, or because look, they're going to put on the full gore press and they're going to hand Rasul Douglas one spot, right?
Yeah.
So that means Kader Kohou's the other spot, and then they need a guy who's versatile enough to play in the slot and on the outside. Storm Duck kind of has that over Cam Smith because he can play in the slot. He's physical. He's good against the run. So yes, about 4 guys is about 5 guys for 2 spots. So it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. And then they have the draft pick who they love, who's giant, 6'2", 210 pounds, and Jason Marshall. So we'll see how he turns out. Although he's also one-dimensional. Because Jason Marshall at Florida, he was only really good in press man.
Yep.
You know? So we'll see how this shakes out. They kind of like Jason Marshall. We'll see in training camp, because in training camp, I always have a coach that takes me aside and says, watch this guy. I remember 2 years ago, there was a guy running around there wearing number 38, and I was like, he's kind of interesting, plays physical, likes to hit people. And I had a coach telling me he's going to make the team, and he's going to play. That guy was Kader Kohou, and he was an undrafted free agent, and that was after 1 practice in training camp. So maybe they identify a guy that's going to be pretty good. And they have another guy, too, in Isaiah Johnson, who's also giant. It's like 6'3", 210 pounds as well.
It'll be interesting to see if they attack this problem with just size. And they go, look, guess what? If we just get big guys and we bang your guys at the line of scrimmage and we hope that holds up, and then we play enough zone and we scheme it up properly, maybe that's enough to slow it down so that our offense can get rolling. And I foresee
what is interesting about this team is in 2020, they had, I think, the 3rd highest paid cornerback tandem in Byron Jones, Xavier Howard.
Yep.
They had it again in 2021. In 2022, it was the same because they just took this over. They added Ramsey in 2023. Byron Jones goes. It's the highest paid cornerback tandem in the NFL. And this year, it's the lowest paid cornerback room in the NFL.
That's the league.
One of the highest paid safety rooms in the NFL.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Dolphins always spam a problem and overcorrect one way or the other, you know?
Well, I can't wait to see how it goes throughout training camp. I'm sure we'll check back in. With that said, Alf, why don't you tell everybody where they can follow your work as the Dolphins, once they get back to it and camp starts and the screaming from your fan base starts to get louder, where can people go to find your work and where can they follow you on social?
Well, if you want to follow all our work, it's easy. Just go to the number 3 yards per carry, and you can get our podcast anywhere you get your podcast. We got a lot of stuff on that feed. We're going to have our camp reports, my camp reports on that feed as well. 3 yards per carry is now back. We're back from hiatus. We took our month off, and now we're back all the way through May of next year. So check us out there. If you want to become a member of our Discord, you got to go to Discord. You go to discord.gg/OnlyFins. You become a member there, all access for $4.99 a month.
Chris, this has been a lot of fun, but we got to get the hell out of here. First of all, I'll see Bill Zito in hell. Second of all, I'm Drew Gear.
Oh, by the way, Bill Zito, I posted a video of Bill Zito talking about that he's in close contact with the Miami Dolphins this year.
Hopefully some of what they got working on rubs off on him.
Maybe we just hire him. Have him do both jobs.
Can the Dolphins hire Bill Zito? God knows the Sabres had an opportunity, but that's a diatribe for another night. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. That's Alf Arteaga. This has been your Rockpile Report.